There have been too many funerals in Northern Ireland's bloody history, but Lyra McKee's felt different, and not just because of the Harry Potter theme of many of the mourners. She apparently loved the films. Intermingled with Lyra's friends and family were politicians from all sides. As her coffin arrived, just a few shutters and seagulls broke the silence, but then... In the service, Father Martin McGill had a message for those politicians.
Many of us will be praying that Lyra's death, in its own way, will not have been in vain and will contribute in some way to building peace here.
The seating plan was clearly intended to bridge divides. The DUP leader, Arlene Foster, placed next to the Sinn Féin president, Mary Lou MacDonald. At times, both women looked uncomfortable.
Why, in God's name, does it take the death of a 29-year-old woman with her whole life in front of her
As the congregation rose behind them, Northern Ireland's supposed leaders were uncertain whether to follow.
A masked man came round the corner out of the shadows with a gun and fired indiscriminately up the street.
Leona O'Neill is a journalist in Londonderry who was with Lyra on the night she died. She's sceptical about whether the politics of Northern Ireland will now change.
We have a perfect storm of the rise of support for these dissident Republicans. We have Brexit threatening our peace, our very, very fragile peace here. Tensions and violence and all that stuff bubbles onto the surface here, and it has done for the last 20 years. It's a very, very delicate piece, and it's like a wound. I think sometimes we put a plaster over it, and every so often we rip that plaster off and it bleeds, and then we put it back on again, and it's just like a vicious circle.
In Derry itself, something has clearly changed. Republican murals have been defaced since Lyra's murder. A new mood, perhaps, to challenge the hard men.
The question is, of course, how much has changed below the surface? After all, the history of Northern Ireland is one punctuated by tragedies, after which people say now things must change. And yet, often we go back to the status quo.
Nobody wants this.
On Monday, a protest outside the office of CIRU, a group that police say is closely aligned with the new IRA. It was the new IRA that claimed responsibility and apologised for Lyra's killing.
Coming here today, there's little evidence that that protest took place at all. On the street outside, there are a few splodges of red paint, but on the sign itself, nothing. It's been cleaned off.
Professor Richard English of Queen's University Belfast studies political violence. He says all too often in Northern Ireland, stains are easily erased.
In the short term, there's no doubt that there has been and will continue to be a blowback against militant republicanism because of this tragedy. People will be horrified at what happened and shocked at it, and there will be a sense of a cold house for these Republicans at the moment. The history of republicanism suggests that that will be short term. There have in the past been instances where previous IRAs have killed people by accident, have killed people whose deaths people disapproved of, and it's proved to be a short-term problem, but not a long-term drawing up of support. In other words, I think as long as there is anger enough for some people to support dissident Republicans, in time that support will come to fruition in terms of further violence in the future.
But Leona O'Neill says the past mustn't be allowed to hold the present hostage.
So we're standing constantly on an abyss in Northern Ireland, and we can go over that abyss if we choose, or we could come back from it. We can pull back from it, but people need to work together. Our politicians need to get back into government. Our communities need to work together and realise that we're all the same. We have so much in common. We have far more in common than we have not.
Lyra McKee was described at her funeral today as doggedly determined as a journalist and full of fun and love as a friend. As she was laid to rest, both her life and death asked profound questions of the future.